Hi, this is Ellen Dudley from Keller Williams Realty. Thank you for joining me for another interesting interview. Today I am interviewing Cean Tan, who is from Care Patrol. Care Patrol is the nation's largest senior placement organization, helping families find senior care through assisted living, independent living, memory care, in-home care, and nursing homes. Hi, Cean. How are you today?
Good, Ellen. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity, as always, to speak about my business.
Great. Thank you for being here. Why don't you tell everybody about your business?
Absolutely. I'm in the business of giving families peace of mind when they're considering senior living options. You know, we start with really understanding what the needs are, whether that's care, social, environmental, or even financial, and then simplifying their choices so they can really focus on a selection. By the time people come to me, usually they're stressed and overwhelmed, so my job is to make their lives much simpler than they were before they came. I also help families do a lot of the legwork, you know, understanding care and violation histories from the regulators, placing the calls to make sure there are openings at communities that they're interested in, and really helping them ask questions when they get in front of the communities so that we really understand that there's proper safety, quality, and the financial considerations have been fully vetted by the families. You know, as a longtime CPA, it's important to me to help families understand the long-term financial consequences of the decisions that they're making. I think many people don't realize that after the first year, they are typically facing 5 to 8% increases in rental rates at assisted living communities. And as their care increases, the costs go up exponentially. You know, I've worked with several clients who have had to move every couple of years because the community has outpriced their ability to pay. And I'd like to see less of that happen to families. You know, I also help families as needed with resources. Working within the senior services community, I know that there are needs for home care services at times, durable medical equipment, downsizers, even, you know, realtors like yourself, Ellen, who help the families, you know, dispose of their home as they make progress towards moving towards a new community that would give them kind of a safer living option. My service is a free community service. What that means is there's no out-of-pocket for the families. I am paid if I give a family a recommendation they decide to pursue by the community that they enter. And that's huge because based on the service I provide, it gives families a lot of value without really tapping into the resources they're saving for their loved ones' care. Frequently, you know, when families come to me, they're at their wits' end with caregiving stress and multiple hospital visits and multiple balls in the air. And my job is really to help them navigate all these concerns in a way that's allows them to really focus on their loved ones and not all the stresses associated with a placement decision. You know, sometimes there's even family dynamics, and my job is to sit people around the table to have a conversation about what's best for the loved one who is finding their new home.
Yeah, you have a lot of arms to your business. So we're now just coming out of this horrible COVID-19 pandemic. How did that affect your business?
Yeah, it's been interesting. The need was still high during the pandemic, but the needs changed. When Massachusetts closed in mid-March, all of the assisted livings closed with it as a means of protecting their residents. So what I needed to do for families became very different. You know, I had one client who at the beginning of this was racing to get into a community that was more financially beneficial for her. She had received an offer and was doing the move. Then the state of the emergency happened, And one community would allow her to move her furniture from their community, but the other community wouldn't allow movers in. So there was a diversity of practice that really impacted people who were making decisions at the time. And what ended up happening is most people decided to shelter in place where they were, stop any type of decision-making process. And in fact, many families made the decision to pull their loved ones out of communities to bring them to places where they felt they could shelter in place safer, particularly when they had summer homes or places where they didn't have multiple generations, potentially exposing their loved ones inadvertently to COVID. So my focus changed to other gaps that were occurring in the industry. There was a huge demand for homemade masks and caps, and I joined the group in producing some of these. Many nursing homes and assisted living had surge needs with isolation gowns, face shields, even hand sanitizer. And I found ways to connect folks to local suppliers while they were waiting for their normal supplies to come in. And finally, there were gaps in some of the services provided to seniors within the community, things like Meals on Wheels. We don't think about how many of our volunteers for some of these organizations tend to be older adults themselves. And what happened is many dropped out of these organizations as volunteers because they were protecting themselves. And there were huge gaps in ensuring that people could get fed who were sheltering at home. So I stepped in to help with some of that as well. So it became very different. And it's not like the calls stopped. The calls just became different. Instead of people looking at assisted living communities, I received calls from families who were planning for nursing homes. They were getting close to the end of assets, had tight income levels, had loved ones at home who were really struggling, and they needed to make a decision as soon as things opened again. So that really became the focus, and that's pro bono work for me. But when we go through these unprecedented times, it's time for all of us to kind of step up and do what's needed to take care of folks who need our help the most.
Right, of course. That's very generous, and it's what we all had to do, right? So now that Massachusetts is starting to open up, what does this mean for senior care communities?
Yeah, well, the first and most important thing is, as Massachusetts started to open, it reduced some of the restrictions on the assisted living communities. The biggest one being families could now do outside visits. Supervised visits, yes, and on the outside, they're still not going into the communities themselves because of the risk of exposure. But just the ability for families to meet outside in courtyards, to see their loved ones face to face, not through windows, not just through FaceTime, that's huge. I mean, social isolation was a big part of the experience for people in these communities, and it was tough. So this change was meaningful, and it's a great first step. I'm also noting that many of the communities are starting to open for move-ins. Not all, but many of them. Tours are still being done virtually, but there are a few that are opening for physical tours, but under very controlled conditions. Everyone wears a mask. Folks go through profile checks to make sure you're not showing symptoms. They get their temperature checked. And then there's multiple hand washing stations throughout the community. And you're only seeing things kind of from a distance with one person at a time. So where I used to do tours where an entire family might go and walk through the community together, usually you end up in a conference room first, and then one person at a time goes to see the room and some of the areas that you're considering. So it's quite a different environment. But the assisted livings are also starting to open up internally to their residents. Before, people were receiving their meals in their rooms and were really isolated within the small units that they might have in the communities. Now, social dining is starting to open up. Granted, you're not going to have a whole table of people sitting together. You're going to have people one-on-one across from each other sitting around. And activities are starting to open. They're not just delivered electronically in folks' rooms. You now have small groups of people in very socially distant environments. Folks who had seen these communities before COVID are somewhat surprised because a lot of the living areas have now been really opened up, where the furniture is spread across the community to make room for social distancing. So we're seeing improvements. There are social activities that are starting to happen again. I mean, I think most people look at assisted living for the social aspects as well as the safety, and a lot of the social were shut down, but they're opening up again, although the calendars are reduced, but we are seeing that improve as well. So now's the time where I am starting to get the calls because families are seriously considering how to return loved ones to communities. And some people did suffer some devastating effects from having COVID and now require care when they didn't before. So it's reopening, and the education is different, the environments are slightly different, but there is interest, cautiously, but still there's interest now in the communities.
So aside from COVID, if my loved one needs a different lifestyle, what kind of questions would I ask if considering assisted living?
Yes. Well, I think the first question people should always ask is whether the community has any positive cases of COVID. I'm finding that most of them have been weeks away from a positive case, but given the nature of this infection, it can happen anytime. We don't have a vaccine yet, so we should always be diligent and be asking that question. We also need to be asking what the infection control response is. I think there wasn't a lot of focus on this before COVID, and now people have real ideas in terms of what they need for PPE, what they need in terms of if someone in a community has COVID, what is going to be the response? What is the response when someone's been in the hospital with COVID in terms of returning to the community? And how is care going to be reassessed? So all those need to be part of what is being asked. Interestingly, assisted living is a social model in Massachusetts, but because of COVID, many of the communities had to step in and do additional medical procedures. I think families should try to understand that as well. And communication is also important. Not every community did a great job communicating with families. So families need to understand if there's another lockdown, if there are concerns, what type of call are they going to get? What type of communication? And how is it going to be handled? Are they in a better position now in terms of FaceTime and ways to keep the family engaged? And visitors, what are the practices with visitors and how is that going to change? And even the activities. For many people, they had been considering assisted living because they wanted the social aspect. Folks really need to understand kind of the before and after and what the thought process is in terms of when that after is going to open up again to give people the kind of community engagement that they expected before COVID happened.
That's a lot of questions.
Yeah, it's a brave new world. But to be honest, people did a great job in this. There were some real heroes in these communities. And I think by asking these questions, people will also get a better sense of that. The creativity, the change that was implemented, the way people stepped up. There's very few times in recent history where you can really consider that. And people's response was just tremendous. And I think by asking questions, you get a better sense of who's going to operate that and who perhaps dropped the ball a little bit.
Right. That's all really good advice. Do you have anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I really try to remind families about is, these were unprecedented times, and I understand that there might be fear. And even before COVID, many families are very slow to sometimes make this decision. It's hard to leave a home you've been in for 30, 40, 50 years. It's hard for children to encourage their parents to, in their mind, give up some of their independence. But this is a decision that really requires some longer term planning, in terms of what you're going to do with your home, financially, how you're going to protect your assets and prepare yourself for the expenses that are involved. even planning the right time. You know, I see people, you know, in say continuing care retirement communities who want those because they present kind of an active senior adult lifestyle that has a lot of great activities, but people will come to me when it's too late to make that kind of move, because those communities won't admit people who are no longer independent. So many of these decisions to get into the communities that most people prefer because of what they offer really need to be done before that fall or stroke that can really take away some of your mobility and put you in a different category of care. And in terms of those who need some financial considerations in the cost of the care, or even memory care, in the best of times, there are a lot of limitations in what's available. There are waiting lists for some of these places that can be a year plus. And so planning is needed ahead of the crisis to ensure that there's the best opportunity for your loved one when the time comes. So I encourage people to understand what's out there, understand their finances, plan around the financing, you know, ahead of the crisis, because then they're in control of the decision and the decision isn't controlling them.
Yeah. What do you do if one spouse really needs assisted living and the other spouse doesn't?
Well, there's a couple of options. You know, I know many families that in that situation will choose to stay at home, and they'll bring in home care services and other services to help. That is a common choice. There are also communities that have a continuum of care. So they'll have independent living, assisted living, memory care, multiple options that will allow you to kind of grow with your care needs. And in those cases, those communities allow you to have independent living alongside assistive care, and they can be really great options for people, because oftentimes what happens with an independent spouse and a spouse who requires some additional care needs is that the independent spouse becomes very focused on the caregiving, loses some of his or her freedoms and ability to really enjoy their lifestyle a bit, and it impacts the relationship between the spouses. It becomes less about really loving and being with each other and more about care, which can be very challenging. I mean, all of us will step up for our spouses to help in those cases, but it changes the dynamic. And so I really encourage people to look at those opportunities that combine both independent as well as assisted, because there are some great options out there for both sides of the equation.
Okay, great. Well, this was super helpful, very informative, and I'm sure if anyone has questions, you're available. I will post your contact information at the end of this video. What's the best way to reach out to you?
Yes, I encourage whatever is comfortable for the family. So I can be reached via email at ctan@carepatrol.com or over the phone. I'm always happy to pick up the phone and have a conversation, even if it's the early stages, at 781-705-6300. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it, Ellen.
Appreciate you. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.